and welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast. So excited that all of you are joining us wherever in the world that you are. We're recording live here in Austin, Texas, and joining me today is none other than Ava's mom, Mrs. Catie Sas. Welcome back.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. And also our youth pastor who is very fluent in the things of culture and faith, Pastor Muhammad Ali. Welcome.
Good to be here.
And then, of course, my good friend and member here at Wells Branch Community Church. We love him so much. It's none other than John Zhu.
I'm so honored to be here for the suicidal mission.
Well, the reason why we brought John on, he sent me a text. And when I mean a text, I mean like a text wall. After I talked on Sunday, because I definitely mentioned deconstruction in a negative light. And then that was something that got John fired up a little bit. I love it when John gets fired up. And so he decided to ask a question. And then I said, man, this seems like something we need to talk about on Pastor Plek's podcast. So I figure let's let her rip. So first off, let's talk about what I talked about that made that kind of like, I don't want to say offended,
really
but like,
pissed you off.
Yeah. Yes, let's go there.
Like, first of all, you mentioned something like deconstruction is associated with taking Jesus being God out of the faith.
Right.
That's just a very, I think, specific
Is that
Gnostic,
a niche people, maybe?
Yeah, like a Gnostic take of using deconstruction in a very questionable way. I would say that. But before that, can I start with just saying who I am, who I'm not?
Yeah. Let's do that.
What I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do?
I like that's fair.
So I think I'm a leftist Marxist. I'm definitely one of the dumbest among the leftists, one of the least read. So I don't think I understand everything I'm going to talk about. And who I'm not a good person. So don't trust me for anything that I say. And it's a very difficult question.
Okay. So I love that you brought up that you're a Marxist. And so tell us, for those who may not be politically astute, what does that mean?
Marxism believes that it's a hoax that in human society, collectively, we all work together to produce, to supply for the whole human species. And there's negotiation of how much of the profit of the produced has to be allocated for whom. And gradually, becomes a class of people who are very good at negotiating to convince the other part of the population that they deserve an astronomical amount, that's kind of like correspond to how much they contribute to the economy.
Right.
Marxism thinks that as long as poor people who work, die of hunger, who cannot live decently, and there are people who's just living off extremely luxurious lifestyle, whatever system that justifies it is just reinforcing the lie.
Okay. So I don't want to go into why I think that's not a good idea, but I do appreciate you presenting it, because I think that...
Can we have a simpler version of what Marxism is?
Essentially that you need to redistribute wealth so the rich people aren't too rich and the poor people don't get taken advantage of.
And Marxism believes that the poor people aren't getting enough, while the rich people are getting way too much in means that's not justifiable.
Right.
Okay.
And whereas I think we don't need to get into capitalism. I just feel like that's good to kind of give your perspective. And you are a Christian who believes that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, rose from the dead.
Absolutely.
Which it's exciting to hear that because usually, and just from my right-wing perspective, we look at left-wing people as there's no way that person can be saved. And not here you are.
All right. I always feel like left-wing people need Jesus more than right-wing people.
Yeah.
Because we are thinking about how the poor are gonna feed themselves.
Yeah.
And here's Jesus who's feeding the poor and saying the most important sermon about the poor, about the oppressed people. So,
and that listen, if there's one thing I'll like, this goes back to in is it Galatians where Galatians where Paul gets the right hand of fellowship. Or is that Acts? Anyway, somewhere. No, this is where I was like, where is this verse? Where he goes, hey, just remember the poor. And it's like, the very thing I was eager to do. Like, yeah, of course. Like, that's where it's like everybody's for the poor. It's just our means of helping the poor might be different. And anyway, we can make that a different podcast, which I'm very excited
about.
Make
too much digression into that.
Yeah, I feel like we have a different.
Me.
Yeah, so let's just start with deconstruction. So let's just give the brief definition of deconstruction. Can we start there?
You're gonna give it?
No, I thought you. Well,
okay.
This is your term.
So the reason I said it's a suicidal mission is because I think to be able to try to summarize what deconstruction is something that's going to be opposed by the writer who came up with the very idea of deconstruction.
Right.
Can I ask a dumb question?
Yeah, please.
Is a Marxist a communist?
Yes. But not always.
No.
But communists aren't always Marxists.
I think Marxist is kind of generally people who understands and considers Marxist philosophical work as an important tool of analyzing, understanding the society. Whereas communists are people who have a specific agenda to change the current political system, to implement a specific way which they believe can achieve Marxist
ideals,
which is like a state of society that Marxist.
Are they tied?
Hold on. With this is a great podcast.
Are they like connected?
Hold on. We gotta we will never get there to the thing.
Oh my gosh.
We're gonna have to do a separate Marxist podcast. So you heard it here, folks. We're gonna have John come back to talk about Marxism and how impossibly he can rectify his brain around it. All right, so we're going to get back to deconstruction because that's what we're here to talk about. So let's get back to the deconstruction definition and take it away.
Mm-hmm. So to kind of do that impossible thing of explaining what deconstruction is, this is why I kind of send you that text.
Yeah.
So can you?
Yeah, I can read that.
Read it.
So yeah, you sent me this text, which is an excerpt from which book?
It's called "The Time That Remains" by Giorgio Agamben.
Okay, so deconstruction is a thwarted messianism, a suspension of the messianic, which to me means the deconstruction pauses the view of the messianic of who Jesus is to ask some questions without having to have that as the presupposition. Is that a good way to put that?
Now we're already going through like a process of deconstruction. So what you came up with.
Okay, what do you got?
This
Katie?
is so stupid.
I am stupid. I said it.
None of my opinions have anything to do with you. But what you just read right there
with words
just sounds like a douchebag trying to sound smart. So let me just put some words that sound fancy in this sentence and describe something. Like what even?
All right. So, but it's important because words have meaning, right? And I think what the person is doing is to, as succinctly, as short and with as much understanding as possible, write the sentence. I think that's where he's going. So when you say thwarted messianism, is that saying like I'm suspending my belief that Jesus is the Christ and I'm putting that aside and I'm just going to go with the basic questions of why am I here without a presupposition of God? Is that where we're going?
So to under this more properly, kind of if you go back, which I haven't sent you, I don't intend to, is the fact that what I try to point to with this is exactly. It's not a good summary of what deconstruction is, even though I can try to offer you an explanation that sheds more light of what he's trying to say.
Okay, yeah, give it to me.
Deconstruction is precisely the fact that an extreme metaphysical claim that there exists no origin from a philosophically linguist point of view. Like, you cannot use language to signify something. There is something that's missing that you cannot just signify. You cannot say
language falls short of explaining fully who God is because it's limited by words.
So is that's why you're deconstructing your faith? What is?
So what's weird is this is where I think maybe I should have prefaced with it. John deconstructed his faith to find Jesus.
Well,
that's not how I would put it.
Okay, how would you say
I'll give you a kind of
brief.
So
you're not trying to deconstruct Christianity?
No. Deconstruction is...
It's a tool that could be used for Christianity. It's also a tool that could be used for anything, correct?
Yeah, it's a very complex philosophical school of thought. It's kind of built upon like centuries of philosophical thinking. And it's just not something that's intended for a people who have not invested learning that thing to be able to understand what it's even trying to say.
So I think a good way, a deconstruction kind of assumes, can I say, assumes that there's some sort of, I don't want to say something wrong, but some agenda within the greater institution, whatever that institution is, and you deconstruct it to find it, to sort of meet that piece out and find the real truth within whatever that thing is. Would that be a fair? So within Christianity,
can you even say real truth? Is it a rejection of all objectivity? Because the second you say something, it has meaning. Like it. First, you have to start with the rejection of all objectivity. Is that correct?
The discourse doesn't go like that. So,
because the second you say anything non-subjective, you are claiming an authority. Correct?
yeah, so to some degree, deconstruction operates within a subjective
Okay.
world.
So it has to
it's-
start with the rejection of all
It's a
objectivity.
way of thinking that allows you to navigate in your own subjective world. You know, there are ways you can try to apply deconstruction. It's not method. Like if you go to the Wikipedia page of deconstruction, there's a list of what it's not. Like this
okay.
is.
Yeah. Okay.
Are you still deconstructing, or did you already finish?
Can you ever stop?
I deconstruct a lot. Like it's like I have to deconstruct. Okay, let me
Is
go
it to better
into-
understand, like what is the root cause of this deconstructing?
The root cause is that words themselves or concept themselves just don't have the capacity of pointing to the truth.
Do you feel like it has anything to do with doubt?
Yeah. Oh, sure. In fact, Richard Rohr, I think he's like a Franciscan friar guy. He's like, we need to embrace our doubts. We need to embrace our doubts. Whenever you are dealing with Christianity specifically, and so to reject doubt is to reject the very thing the Gospels are about. You know, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Matthew 28:15 or whatever it is. I think there is some aspect of doubt within deconstruction, but this is important when you're. I think we're getting to a place of what deconstruction is not. So, man, I feel like I'm going to spin. This is where I'll find
still
myself like a
confused.
Jordan Peterson talking in circles. But where you're questioning everything. You don't just take a truth assumption as truth until you've broken it down. The problem is, when do you get to decide
Yeah, who
what's
gets
true?
to decide?
Like, is that a real Yeti mug over there that Mo has because it's so small? He's in Texas now. Those aren't Yetis.
That's
That
why
is
somebody else got
so
me a bigger
tiny.
Yeti.
Yeah. So did you know that? So Aaron Hughes just felt sorry for Mo because he has a California Yeti.
I got it here. I got it at the.
He got a California size Yeti, and then she bought. It's like, listen, what did she say to you?
She said, "Your little Yeti made me smile. Here's a real one."
That is hilarious.
I love that.
That is so.
Yeah, I got an extra Yeti, dude. I'll take it.
All right,
Yeah.
sorry. Back to.
I think you've given enough interesting explanation of how you understand it that
Okay.
I want to offer my explanation
there we
of
go.
what the
Thank
excerpt
you.
I asked you to read
Yeah.
means. Like
Because that's good.
deconstruction is a thwarted messianism or messianism.
Yeah.
It's a suspended messianic means it's a metaphysical structure that points to the necessity of the Messiah.
Okay.
It's
I have no
basically-
problem with that.
Or to kind of put it in other words, the reason we are in a kind of deconstructive state because something hasn't been completely fulfilled.
Sure, we're
What?
living already, but
Like,
not yet.
you know, I'm
yeah.
living my life, I'm already a believer of Jesus, and I'm still going through a pretty painful life.
Sure, and I think
Like the whole book, this book, The Time That Remains, it's a very interesting read. I think it's trying to explain in a kind of philosophical way of thinking, what does it mean that we are already saved by Jesus, but still the world has not seen its redemption in completion.
absolutely this is
Like
living
you,
in the
you
already
haven't
not
had
yet.
an easy life, or you've had too hard of a life. I don't. And
No.
that's why I'm still trying.
I
to,
think he's just and that's where I'd say as someone who has a heart for the poor, and their lives in general don't look like ours, right? And so, how come they're not experiencing a messianic kingdom like we? Was that where you're going? We
No,
are.
I'm talking about myself.
Okay.
Like the kind of state I am in right now, like I'm a believer, I know Jesus is my savior, is going to be different from the moment when I meet Jesus face to face.
Sure.
And in that process, deconstruction is inevitable because like last week I had the perfect worship I've ever had. And now it's deconstructed. Why? Because that didn't exist. If you try to make that experience something you can just repeat, you can just kind of idolize, then it's not like to be able to authentically stay in a close relationship with God. To me, is to be constantly deconstruct yourself, to be aware like everything you do, everything you're thinking, what does it really come from? Like it's a necessity until I meet Jesus face to face.
So this is an existential crisis, or no crisis, right? It's an existential sort of like, how do I exist? Why do I believe? Am I really here? Or I am here and I'm experiencing sorrow and suffering and not the messianic hope that I've been promised. And I'm in this waiting period until Jesus fully reveals himself.
Does it have a lot to do with feelings? Like what you're feeling?
It's a way
about
of
yourself,
feeling
or?
is like a main kind of object deconstruction trying to deconstruct. It's not so that you're not going to feel anything, but you can kind of trace where they come from.
Yeah.
So a constant state of reflection?
Yeah.
Okay, so can I tell you where maybe this will help you to kind of, here's where I get critical of deconstruction. Rob Bell, are you familiar with who Rob Bell is? So he's a mega church pastor in Michigan, Mars Hill Church. And he had these really cool videos back when I was in my 20s called Pneuma videos, and he just did an excellent job of describing the world and just was awesome. And then he started deconstructing his faith. And then he's, gets on Oprah and he starts saying like, well, I don't really know if I believe in hell anymore. I don't believe in hell anymore. There is no hell. Because, and because that doesn't make sense to me, like there's, God is a loving God, and I think our evangelical way of looking at it is really off, and so we can't say that there's a hell. And so, Love Wins is his book, all right? That's the one that sort of like gives up on the idea of hell. And I think that's problematic because then what did Jesus die for? Like, why did and so then you're now taking away, Jesus didn't die to save you from hell. So what are you saved from? Okay, you're saved from an existence without the presence of God. Anyway, so it gets to a place where you're like, you've made hell not so bad. Jesus' sacrifice isn't that great. And then and that's the problem I have with deconstruction. Or another person.
Can I just respond to that?
Okay, go ahead.
Because the problem I see with that is I don't think deconstruction leads to a denial of the existence of hell.
Sure.
But what it kind of definitely opposes the evangelical way of thinking hell as something that just like simply exists. For me, deconstruction is a way of thinking about hell in what does it really mean when every time we say hell.
Okay.
And for me, like hell means like I live in hell literally every time when I turn away from God. That's hell right there.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't deny, like, and whenever I think about hell, I don't want to like prescribe with like some. It's not that I'm going to deny the whole evangelical understanding of what hell is, but I'm not going to take it just as something that's absolutely true. And back to like the question that I wanted to ask you about your evangelical theological beliefs.
Yeah.
Say after the eschaton, we're with Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
and you find out that some evangelical theology isn't right. Is that going to shock you?
No, I won't care.
That's as far as deconstruction should or would go. It's it's an attitude of allowing the suspension that for some of these deep theological things we might not have a black or white answer.
Sure.
And it's a matter of
There's a lot of gray. I'll give you. There's a lot of gray, but there's some things that we can say for sure because Jesus, like,
There's definitely good and evil and a stark difference between good and evil.
Sure, and maybe that's the point. Maybe like I think foundationally as Christians, we come down to like these are the core tenets of our faith, which is why the Apostles' Creed and all those things, the Athanasian Creed, were all written is so that everyone could be on the same page. And then we could argue about things that don't matter. But we can't do that unless we all agree on some base theology. And I think heaven and hell is part of that base component. And you would say maybe not.
I would say if you agree with someone on evangelical theology, it doesn't really say much about what you actually agree upon.
But what does that mean? I think this is where, as an evangelical, of course, I think my theology is true, but I just think it's theology. It's like, what do you mean by that? So evangelical theology.
Do you not like evangelical Christianity? Is that what you're?
So the interesting thing
'Cause
is,
every
whenever I
time
come,
you've said evangelical, you'd say it in a negative tense.
well, so I have to kind of explain this way. So
This is
whenever I
good.
come to my church, I almost like overly proclaim that I'm Marxist.
Yeah.
But when I talk to my leftist friends, I always say I'm an evangelical, which
Well, yeah, because they're
gets them on
leftists.
nerves.
No,
You
no,
know,
but
you know
no,
what this
that's
term.
really,
Sorry.
that's offensive to say to a Marxist to say for him to claim evangelicalism means he's owned it as an identity. So I think he's coming from within to critique evangelicalism, not coming from without. Is that fair?
I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying. But
So-
when I say I'm an evangelical, when
Right.
I'm with leftists, I know they're gonna say like, "How can you be an evangelical?
Right.
Aren't evangelicals or assholes who, love Trump? They just, want to control
Yeah.
women, all that kind of stuff." And the point of me saying that is that no, I go to an evangelical church. I think this church is evangelical. I love them. There are a lot of things that I don't feel comfortable with, but I just love them, and they are as I don't know, redeemable as the rest of them.
Man, this is why I love you, John. You as I am to the right, you are to the left, and I think that I really enjoy that about you, because I do think you come
I
at
have the same feeling, and what confuses me is I feel like you're a very deconstruction person.
Oh, how do you
Like-
say that? Give me why. Give me a why.
Deconstruction is really like.
And listen, I don't care about the term. If deconstruction fit, the reason. Let's go back to why, because I want to hear why you think I'm deconstructionist, and I'll tell you why. First off, why I have a problem with some of it, because it's what I've heard, and this might be where I have the wrong definition. So there's a guy in Austin. He's got a church downtown, and they are gay affirming. And what they're saying is that the church has built up this like anti-homosexual sort of agenda starting in 1961 when the word, whatever the word for homosexual is in 1 Corinthians, it was effeminate, and they changed it to homosexual to make sure that they could oppress homosexual people. And I don't think that was it at all. And so what happens is like you build up on this, and so all of a sudden you're like, aha, I've found the criminal intent behind this. So we've got to deconstruct marriage. The institution of marriage is no longer a thing the way that we knew it. That's just a societal hierarchy put on to oppress the people who are different. And so therefore we need to abolish it all. And what that does to me, that the deconstruction that led to the destruction of the nuclear family, I think that's hurtful, but that came from the process of deconstruction. And maybe that's where you're saying it could be used for that. It's a tool, like any tool. Like a hammer could be used to break into a house or tear it down, and a hammer could also be used to put in a nail. And that might be what you're saying, is it doesn't matter where their results came from, but the process was good. They just took it down a negative way.
Yeah, like if you ask me to read like all the evangelical world deconstructing things, how deconstruction is affecting it, I might disagree with a lot of that.
Okay.
But the point is, I don't think enough people in evangelical read this kind of stuff and try to understand it to kind of do apologetics, within, because I think sometimes evangelical have a more superstitious view on worldly thoughts and ideas.
Like have folk theology that's built into Trumpism.
like why do we have to care what deconstruction has to say about Christianity? That kind of thought is, I think it's common. It's not universal,
Okay.
but it's common.
Okay. All right. So talk to me about you say I'm a deconstructionist, which I thought that was really fun. Give me why I love that.
I think whenever you feel like whatever conceptualization you have about a biblical concept or anything,
Or story, or-
and you feel like just whatever your previous understanding doesn't fit,
Right.
you just use Jesus to kind of fix it up. Like everything seen under your faith with like your firm belief of who Jesus is, what he has done, what he has achieved, you can always see the ultimate meaning even when something doesn't add up,
Sure.
doesn't work the way you think it should.
Right.
You don't get frustrated. You're like deconstructing at that moment what you have taken for granted, what you anticipated, and kind of reconstructing that. with your faith in Jesus.
For example, I think there was a psalm I just read recently. I think it's Psalm 142. I think it's Abimelech. And it's, if I can recall this properly, it said when David changed his behavior before Abimelech. I think it's Psalm 142. And he then talks about he's all alone. Even his father and mother left him. He's abandoned. And but it mentions Abimelech, who he changed his face. Well, Abimelech's not the guy's name. It's Achish. He was the king of the Philistines. Well, the problem, not problem. If I look at that, I'm like, oh crud, the Bible's wrong. Or like, man, those copyists, they got it wrong. And the originals probably say Achish, but some idiot, shortly after David wrote it, misspelled Achish and it came out Abimelech. Then you're like, oh my gosh, should I throw out my whole faith? Because a lot of people and this might be the part where people find what looks to be an apparent error in the Bible and then they lose it. And I would say the Bible is infallible. I just need to figure out how it was infallible. The problem is me, not the Bible. And is this where you're saying, no, it's okay to look at the Bible as fallible, and you need to go find out why it has the wrong guy in there, and then that doesn't deconstruct, that your faith is still solid, even though you deconstructed the fact that the Bible is not.
You're partially correct.
Okay, give me the part, because this is the part I'm struggling with on understanding it.
First of all, I don't believe Bible is the word of God just because there's this book.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's the word of God because I know Jesus is God.
And I would agree with that. So you and I are on the same page on that.
Right. And then when
But is that a deconstructionist thought, that I believe the Bible's word of God?
I don't know, deconstruction is something that more subtly happens in your consciousness rather than you just apply the method there's a formula for it.
Mm-hmm.
But the second half of the question is, if something in Bible doesn't fit, I don't think, part of it is, let's find out what caused that. But the interesting thing is, God's glory is not reduced if there's an error. God can intentionally put an error to test who's going to fall away just because they see this error. Or there can be infinite amount of discussion and seeking from anything we find out about the Bible.
Right.
I think the Bible is infallible because I know Jesus.
Yeah.
And
okay.
I know how Bible plays a essential role in giving us everything we know about
Okay,
Jesus.
so I love. I'm kind of agreeing with everything you're saying. So I'm trying to find the part where we don't agree, and specifically on Psalm 142. So let me just rest everyone's souls, because what, there's error in the Bible. So the way that because I look at theology as faith seeking understanding. So because I believe in Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
and because he said the law, the prophets, and he mentions the Psalms, I go that is true. And so then I look at it from that perspective. Abimelech means my father is king, which Achish could have been, that title could have been my father is king. He's Abimelech, my father is the king. And that could have been his title, because the father could have been God, it could have been, whatever. So he's just the prince who rules over, so it's therefore a title. So that's how you would, fix that or resolve that, so you're intellectually, emotionally okay. But I think there are places where you're going to have a gap where you have to say, I don't know if I can believe this now, but I will. So, maybe you have an issue with Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate there's no biblical evidence outside of the books that we have of, Antiquities of the Jews. But in 1961, the first archaeological discovery was the Pilate stone. And everyone's like, whoa, the Bible, it's amazing. And it was dated to the time when the Bible was written. So all that to say is that there might be something that looks like an apparent contradiction, but we haven't discovered the thing that's going to go, aha. And then the reason why there's a contradiction, so you can go for thousands of years or hundreds of years, skeptics always pointed this one thing. And then recently in 2022 or 23, we found this thing that shows that those who took it on faith were always right. I guess what I'm saying is, I thought deconstruction was, don't take stuff on faith, take stuff on the intellectual ability to see it all, break it down to its components, to find the hidden agenda that is there in the institution, and then take that out so you can get the purity of the relationship with God. I thought that's what it is, but what I'm hearing you saying is that it doesn't necessarily have to be that, because I'm always don't throw because I feel like people want to throw the church out, and I feel like the church is the bride of Christ. And even Martin Luther was Martin Luther's mentor was although, she's a whore of a bride, it's still the bride of Christ. And I think that's where we got to look at the church is still it's Christ's bride. And I think what happens for a lot of people, I've experienced deconstruction, they want to give up on the church. And so maybe
They
that's
got
the part.
their
And
feelings
that's,
hurt.
I'm not giving up on
and that's
those
how
folks.
you're not that
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
which blows.
I'm
I
not
feel
giving
like,
up even on my evangelical identity.
But
even
I
though
feel like that's where
question what that means.
you're unique. So I don't think, I don't want to say, this is where it's bad. I don't think you represent the most deconstructionists, because deconstructionists usually go down the place where like, I am now a deconstructionist. I'm always going to be questioning everything. I know there's a motive there. I just haven't found it yet.
And the key to that is to deconstruct his intention behind why he's deconstructing these things this way.
Okay, so so a pure deconstructionist goes like, okay, you're looking for the intent, but let's deconstruct
Right.
you now and why you're
Yeah.
looking for that intent. Now I'm down with deconstruction,
And
if
can I
that's
give
what
you
we're calling it.
you're trying to look for something we disagree. Let me try to provoke you with
I'm
some
just like,
really
we're
radical
like on the same page, John.
idea. Is I sometimes kind of play with the idea of what if. What if, let's say, Jesus was never raised from the dead
Mhm.
and there's no resurrection or eternity as we know it.
Okay.
And the fun that I had with that idea is,
I
even
love
if
that you
I
call that
try,
fun. That's a fun idea.
and even if I try to believe that as some kind of like truth that it's going to be like that, will I feel regret that I'm a Christian?
Mm.
And the answer that I find myself in is not actually. I can still see that Jesus is God, because even if he was not raised from the dead and we're not going to resurrect with him, it's still the best story I can ever imagine that can redeem humanity, even
Okay.
if he's. But that's
Okay.
that's definitely not anywhere near what my
Sure, and I know,
theological
and
belief is.
you're just giving me a hypothetical, to which you'd say, well, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul has that moment, because he, in a sense, would be
Right, right,
deconstructing, going like, if Jesus isn't raised from the dead, we're the worst of all to be pitied, because we're complete losers.
What are we doing?
Yeah, what are we
But
doing?
that he's just joking about it. Like
Right,
if
right, right.
that's even the truth with the love he has for Jesus, we're gonna be okay.
Right.
We don't really like live our faith because we want eternity, but we just cannot be separated from the love of Jesus. That's what gives us the faith. Not,
Okay.
any. But that's just intentionally provocative
Sure.
to bring out the point. And talking about deconstruction, I was going to bring up 1 Corinthians chapter 7. I think married as if not married,
Yeah.
weeping as not weeping. Because sometimes I feel, when you read these things, are you thinking the same things when you heard me first talk about like deconstruction is the thwarted messianism,
Yeah.
that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Because I think Christianity actually, in order to understand the full depth of it, like in a metaphysical way,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of ideas that's just so complex. Like I think sometimes a little bit of the thought exercise is going to help. For understanding Bible, because that paragraph is really a concept closely related to deconstruction or
Right.
kind of
He's going to
Hegelian dialectic.
hypothetical to help you
Yeah.
understand what your relationship with God. Are you talking about Romans 7? Is that what you're talking about? 1 Corinthians 7?
1 Corinthians 7, when he talked about like staying married
Yeah.
as if not married, because deconstruction is really a kind of overthrow of all existing meaning. Like married, you're not really married just for the sake of marriage. You're married for the sake of the Lord.
Right. And you're representing Jesus in the church.
That was like a deconstruction of the whole marriage, right?
Okay.
And-
Okay.
And, again, like the whole
Alright.
Romans is like a deconstruction.
I think I'm agreeing with you more and more here.
in a way that why does God give the law and then allow us who does not abide with the law to get saved? That's God deconstructing like the previous system, not because that's the totality of all there is.
Is this you reclaiming the word deconstruction for evangelicals? Because
It
most
doesn't sound like
most
you're-
deconstructionists are not going to be this favorable to the Bible,
Right,
and maybe they're
right.
not pure deconstructionists. This, if you're
Maybe
saying
there's
it,
that
another word that you can use.
I don't know.
well, and maybe you're, like when you own the word, you own the idea and the culture around it. So
Because what I think about whenever I hear deconstructing is like, all the people during 2020 that were like, I'm deconstructing my faith and
Right.
I'm on a journey and blah, 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 because something hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
But that doesn't sound like you.
I
No.
think the deconstruction movement in the evangelical world is a very different phenomenon, go through different layers when deconstruction as a philosophical concept, how it permeates through
so
culture.
maybe so what I'm talking about is that whenever I'm preaching and I'm sort of down on deconstruction, I'm going to that ridiculousness where you won't deconstruct your own self and your own heart. So it's like a halfway deconstruction of I'm going to deconstruct that thing because I'm the person of perfection and I have all the reality understanding here, or at least I have a complete judgment of fairness.
Yeah,
and I think
I don't like that, so I'm going to try to deconstruct it.
Right.
So give you an example of how I
Yeah.
deconstructed myself. I
Yes.
used to go to James Foster's community group.
Yeah.
And it was community group that's so good and so bad at the same time for me. So good is because they're all way more wonderful people than I am. I'm learning a lot from them. The bad part is I'm not a sports person. I don't
Right.
watch any kind of sports.
Right, so all the-
sports is all they talk about. And at that moment, what deconstruction means to me is I'm deconstructing myself. What am I doing here?
Right.
I'm not doing here because I have shared interest with these people, because I love them, because we're part of the same body of Christ.
Right.
And because we are here and the Lord wants me here,
Is it-
and whatever I'm looking for, that's not what I need. I need whatever the Lord is going to give me.
This makes you so unique, John. Like you are such a
You're just laying aside your personal preferences.
you're a rare person.
But that's deconstruction looks like. If
You make Marxism look so
you
good.
love Jesus and you want
Oh,
to deconstruct. The only thing that cannot be deconstructed is your faith in Jesus.
Okay.
As you know that he's your savior. And everything's going to be okay. And then the rest of the things are all probably problematic.
Yeah.
It just sounds like you're in a constant state of reflection. It doesn't.
That's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
That's all it is. to
It's
me.
like meditating on the Lord a lot.
And you're just growing, like you're being sanctified.
But before I came to faith, it's horrible. Like if you don't know Jesus, you try to deconstruct everything, there's nothing you can cling on to. And you feel like the world is such a hell. That was
Why do you claim the title deconstructionist?
because the guy who came up with the idea of deconstruction, Jacques Derrida,
Mhm.
is like a
French
prominent
philosopher.
thinker that I used to read. I haven't really finished any of his like core books.
Doesn't he like tear apart like Plato? Isn't that like it's like you need to throw out the assumptions of
But
Platonic
see,
thought?
that's where the problem of deconstruction trying to point at shows is you're so missing on the real point by whatever understanding you
Have previously.
from just those phrasing
Yeah.
that just throw Plato out of the window, that kind of thing.
Right.
It doesn't really say much about what the school of thought actually means.
Wow. Okay, so we have to wrap it up because it's that time. Hey, we're going to come back. We're going to bring John back on. I know everyone's like dying to hear more about John and what Marxism means, and so we'll be bringing him back at a later time. But listen, if you have any questions for him and deconstruction, or we can take deconstruction a different way if you want to go down that road. But if you want to talk faith, culture, everything, anything in between, we would love to hear from you. Man, this is my pleasure to have John. Thank you for being on our show. This is like awesome. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. And so, hey, listen, if you have any questions, just text us at 737-231-0605 or go to pastorplek.com, leave a message for us there. Or also make sure you subscribe, share, let everyone know about this podcast. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you take your favorite part and share that clip. Hey, thanks so much for watching. From our house to yours, have an awesome week of worship.